All right, here we are. Welcome back to Book Wave, the book club podcast. I'm your host, Scotsley, joined again today by our good friend Marvin. How are you, Marvin?
Doing well. I told you already, it's very hot in Vienna today. I
Yeah.
was going around doing some stuff, and I sat down with my roommate. We had something to drink, and we're enjoying the weather. And yeah, now we're sitting here to talk about important stuff. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to it.
Thank goodness that spring has sprung. So,
Yeah, yeah. Thank God, Christ is risen, as we see.
yeah. In
How are
Vienna
you
and
doing?
in Canada.
Very nice. How
Yeah.
how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. It's just same as you. I'm enjoying the weather. I'm trying to get a little bit of a garden started out in the backyard,
Mm.
so hopefully that is fruitful. So yeah,
Quite
we're
literally, yeah.
we're gonna do this as a bit of a follow up to our last big conversation and just try to get down into the weeds of whatever this is we're talking about. So what opening questions do you have to launch this episode off for us?
Yeah, I'd like to know your general, let's say, opinion or stance on maybe religion in general, and then especially Christianity, and then also the differences between before you started reading the Bible and afterwards. That'd be very interesting to me, and then we'll see where we can go from there.
Yeah. So I'd say the Bible itself hasn't really had the biggest effect. I think the biggest like a turning point was when I really started listening to Jordan Peterson, and it kind of came out of like a political thing because when I started listening to Jordan Peterson the most, it was because of Bill C-16 here in Canada and the everything going on in the universities, and I was just like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. And by this time I was already a fan of figures like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, the whole Four Horsemen thing. There's a guy that wrote a book called what was it? A Philosophical Atheism, and that had a pretty big effect on me. So it was like the first time I was really comfortable calling myself an atheist was born out of an argument with one of my grandmothers about why, like, whether or not Noah's Ark actually physically happened. Like Noah's flood and like putting all the animals. I'm like, okay, if you believe this, then I don't know if I can put myself in this classification. But Jordan Peterson really was like, all right, fine, but did you think about it this way? I'm like,
Mm.
oh, not really, no. So I'm still at a point where, like, I'm completely agnostic. Like, I don't have an opinion of whether or not the figure of Jesus Christ physically existed and resurrected, but at the same time, I don't think that really has an effect because of like it kind of cheapens it to call it a story or a mythology, but like that pattern, it exists in like how we all live our lives. Like even if we don't realize it, the figure of Jesus matters. And like again, I hate to cheapen it, but I think in the same way for a lot of like hardcore comic book nerds like me, Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, they all exist in a similar way that helps us direct who we are. But again, I don't want to cheapen it and be like it feels more like kind of a pagan mythological alternative to Christianity when we start putting superheroes up as our idol. But I do see like a modern superhero as equivalent to like a pre-Christian hero like Odysseus or Achilles, someone like that who's above humanity, and they're kind of like in tune with something you could call God, but it's not the same kind of God that exists in Christianity. And for a long time, I feel like the two, like the Christian story and like the mythological, like the mythology of entertainment could coexist. But now I'm starting to have like, I'm starting to second guess that when, I don't know if you know about this, but in the Marvel continuity lately, Jesus Christ has been labeled as like the first mutant or something. I'm like, okay, that's going too far, man. That's going too far. You can't do that. You can't do that. But yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
just surprised. Surprised maybe isn't the best word because it's to expect of them, but interesting. I haven't heard that yet. I stopped watching the Marvel movies really after I think after Endgame or maybe after the last Spider-Man. Like I did watch the last Spider-Man because I grew up with Spider-Man and I wanted
Of
to see
course.
all three of them together. So yeah, obviously
Yeah.
I watched that one, but no, I hadn't heard that they labeled him as a mutant.
Yeah, that's only happened in the comics now, but I mean, comic writers, the big two anyway, Marvel, DC, I have a lot of problems with them. Like back when they just attacked Jordan Peterson, compared him to the Red Skull for no reason. I had a big piece to say about that. But yeah, I think there's like as important as Spider-Man is to like secular atheist comic book nerd like kids like myself back in the day. I think that's where I think that's the core of most religious stories. It's just a better story. But yeah, like to like focus on the incarnation specifically again, I don't know if it objectively happened. I'm trying to avoid the word literal here because we all know that word doesn't mean the same thing to different people. So, like, to say it literally happened, I don't think you can deny that because literal comes from the word literature. So you could just say literarily it happened. Well, literarily, Spider Man saved the world a few times. So, but yeah, I think there's a lot more to be found in the Christian story that we've completely thrown away. Like Jordan Peterson says, we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. I think there's much more to be learned from the Bible itself and all of the extra biblical texts surrounding it. And to dispose of that would be like, to dispose of that would be like to just take away the entire Marvel universe to a kid who grew up reading nothing but the Marvel universe.
Yeah,
So,
I see what you mean. Yeah,
yeah,
I would say, well, I mean that quite a few points. Um,
right.
First of all, I definitely see the connection, let's say, between or the similarities between the old myths, also the pre-Christian myths, and modern superhero stories. They do take a very similar role. I wouldn't go too far with that because in the end, and I think we're not at that point in our discussion yet, but in the end, it obviously makes a great difference if it's a story that objectively happened and has the implications that the Christian story has with the whole salvation thing and so on. Or if it's just something that can boost your morale or maybe even teach you more. Um, it's because I mean, from one standpoint, you can say that we wouldn't have something like morality if if it wouldn't objectively exist. Um, I think that's a fair claim to make. That's what I like to throw in the direction of a true atheist, let's say, is that he says, I can be, or some of them say, I can be a good person without believing in God. And the problem with that is that you can't. Or maybe, first of all, you wouldn't have any idea what good or bad even would be if there wasn't something or someone writing it in stone, let's say, making it unchangeable. Because otherwise, I could say one day say hitting people is wrong, and then the next day when someone annoys me, I can say, well, maybe it's not that wrong. I can hit this person, for example.
Yeah.
Um,
And you kind of
so
see that in like modern day among like the people who lack religion or some kind of code or basis, that their decision just does change between day to day. Like all they do is watch the news without making any specific examples. You say, "Oh, one day I'm supposed to do this and the next day I have to do the opposite." So, but there was a one thing you said there that like there are elements of Christianity that I think you cannot take out of the Western man, let's say. If you grew up in the Western world, like just your tradition, the way you like wake up in the morning and interact with people is inherently Christian, even if you don't realize it. We may be in danger of losing that if we lose like the secret ingredient of Christianity, which I think is faith, which is, I think, the best way to describe myself would just to be faithless. Now, I don't like the word none just because it has extra connotations. Like you see all the Christians say all these nuns, NONES, and they have to spell it afterwards. Like just call it faithlessness, because I think that's the real key. Because most of these people, myself included, don't realize how Christian they really are in their upbringing and the way they, like I said, interact with everybody, the way they compete in games, just like certain ticks that we don't realize, like certain little things that make us mad, like you're treating me like I'm less of a human, and that angers me. And I think that's either just purely human or that comes from the religious instinct of like all men and women are equal in the eyes of God, which is something that I I don't know, like the Jordan Peterson act as if you believe it. Like part of me believes that like all of us have something that make us equal. I just don't know why I believe that. But I like the root of atheism is to just say like atheism. Theism is a belief in God. Atheism is to live your life without a belief in God. Is without God. So I think that like key figure is the only, well, not the only, but the biggest difference between a Christian and an atheist is just the deity. Everything else, like between you and me at least, it might be different if you go to China or India, somewhere in Africa where traditions are much different. But at least the two of us can interact in a way that we can kind of connect, even if we don't have that one thing in common.
yeah, I see what you mean, and that's definitely what you experience in normal everyday life with between people who do believe, who do have faith, and those who don't. Is that we share enough common values that interactions are possible. I think it gets problematic when these values get tested. So when you
Right.
which is Jordan's, I think Jordan's favorite example, when you get into a tyrannical um, government and society, then these things are tested. Um, someone who truly believes in God and the Christian values and has them 100% integrated, which most, not even most Christians have. Like I certainly don't, even though I try to. Is that whatever you demand of them, whatever horrible act you demand of them, they will not do it, and they will choose certain death if necessary to avoid an action like, gassing juice, for example. And someone who thinks they share the same values or do share the same values, but have no immovable foundation for it, they will be able to be pushed further and further towards atrocities. If there's a great example in the Gulag Archipelago, where I think it was in that book, where Solzhenitsyn talks of, I'm going to get it partly wrong, but the important parts I'll get right, is that I think a mother or a child was picking up individual grains that fell from the wagon or hadn't blossomed or whatever to eat them because they were starving. And a low-level judge, and that's where I might get it wrong, but a low-level judge was supposed, according to the law, supposed to sentence them to death. And I think he something like appealed to a higher court and said, I can't do that because that's wrong. I can't kill a mother or a child for picking up, like 10 grains that wouldn't have been sown anyway. And then the judge, the higher judge, said something approximating, well, there is no God who determines what's right or wrong. So we determine what's right or wrong. And we say that this is punishable by death. So yes, you can do that, and you will. It was something like that. I probably got something wrong, but the important part I got right. And that's the problem, say. And also, if you're like a normal father and you get called to I don't know, tell the Nazis where the Jews are hiding or something like that, you know what's going to happen to them if you tell the Nazis. Then you can be pushed a little more, pushed a little more, pushed a little more, and then that's where you end up. That's how you end up in hell. It's like through small individual steps that you might not even notice consciously.
That kind of reminds me of a sequence in a book that does not talk about God at all, Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand.
Mm-hmm.
So she is quite famously the founder of objectivism and very atheist, as faithless and God-hating as you can get. So there is one a scene, I guess, in the book where there's a train that's burning coal and it's about to go through a tunnel that if it's forced to go through the tunnel, the coal smoke is going to fill up the tunnel and everybody is going to die. So there's a bunch of series of phone calls trying to stop it from happening. One guy on the ground calls the next guy up, who calls the next guy up, who has to call the next guy up, saying we can't take it through or we're all gonna die. And the guy just says, well, take it through anyway. The train needs to go. It needs to go. So he calls the next guy and says, yeah, the train needs to go. It needs to go. And they keep passing off the buck because no one wants to be responsible for stopping the machine of progress. And eventually the train doesn't make it through the tunnel and they have to fish it out. So this huge tragedy happens because nobody is willing to make the call. No, people are in danger. But the one person that would have stopped it, in the book anyway, is not a Christian. She's just an objectivist who sees the value of human life. So I see what you're saying, but I don't think that the perception of the value of human life has to come from religion, but it is a damn good source of it.
It's an immovable basis. I think that we have that in us, like we know that life is valuable and sacred, even to the degree that we can conceptualize the idea of sacredness. But I think that if you don't ground it in something, again, immovable,
Right.
then you'll be able to be pushed away from that. So I think that's more of a value in
So then
proper religion.
so then God and religion gives us the reason to stick to that value, you could say.
Yes. I mean, ultimately, God is also the source of the value itself. So, but we're so far into Western civilization that we have, as you already said, we have incorporated that into our beings and the way that we were raised. So we don't question. Normally, we don't question. But if you know why you don't question it, then you're a lot. You stand firmly in it. And if you don't know why you don't question it, then it's not as secure, let's say.
Yeah, we're kind of getting into the realm of what's the difference between a good Christian and a good person. So how would you define the difference between those two? Because as like a faithless person, there really wouldn't be a difference other than the Christian has to stick to like a bunch of extra little codes, let's say. I don't know how to best put it.
I get what you mean. Um, More intelligent people would be capable of giving a better answer than I'm trying to give. But the God, the relationship that we have to God is personal, first and foremost. It's not the same as this idea of the universe, for example. That's how people nowadays like to think of God, is like, as the universe told me this, the universe wants this and that. And so there's, again, if Christianity is true, which I wholeheartedly believe, then all these extra things are not extra things, and that they are fundamental to the whole. Prayer, for example, is a personal interaction with the creator of the universe, and you're also called to cultivate a personal relationship with him, going so far that we become his friends to the degree that that is possible. It's not only servants, we become his children and we become his friends. And it's very hard for me to put into words the difference between these two worldviews, but I hope that maybe we can try to work it out, because if you have an impersonal force that created the universe, then it's all they have no better word than saying it's impersonal. Something that gets personal is a lot more defined and, I think, crystalline, something like that. So there's an important difference, I would say, between them. If you have loyalty to an idea or loyalty to a person, it's also there's an emotional difference also in these two things, I would say. And the difference between them and a good person and a good Christian, like a truly good Christian, would be that in the hierarchy of values, they inherit different positions. So you have the good person, maybe, just to say something, somewhere in the middle, where they really try to be a good person and they're not trying to hurt anybody, they don't lie and all of that. But you have the good Christian who's participating in the sacraments and who is going to confession and who is praying and trying to, you know, give people some of that personal love that God gives them, to give it to those other people as well. And that's like you're getting closer and closer to the top, and you're getting closer and closer to the actual ideal, which I would say now is Jesus Christ. So if Christ really is the pinnacle of this hierarchy, then obviously those who follow him more, even though the others don't lie and don't steal and don't murder, are still better. They are higher up in the hierarchy of goodness, let's say. And I'm not saying that in let's say, in an arrogant manner, and I'm also not counting myself to those higher up people or something like that, because I'm also very far away from being who I would like to be. I'm very far from the ideal. So yeah. Does that make sense to a degree?
Yeah, that I've been, trying to find a good answer to that question for a while, and I think that's the best one that I've come across so far. So
Thank God.
it really kind of like it sparks the image of Dante's Inferno. Have you read it yourself?
Not yet.
Well, it depicts, like, in the most mild ring of the underworld, it depicts like figures like Aristotle and Plato and Socrates are there. Just like in the outer rim, not like the extreme punishment, but in kind of like just like a lounge room kind of thing. Like, yeah, this is hell, but it's not eternal damnation like the real sinners get. But like that still always bugged me. I'm like, why would you put some of the greatest thinkers who have contributed even like to Christianity? There's many Christian figures that have called Plato like a Christian without Christ. I'm like, that's really powerful coming from like a Christian talking about a pre-Christian pagan, like they had some respect for these figures even though they were non-believers, and that they still found their way into the underworld, which never sat right with me, but that kind of gives me a better like reasoning why Dante would do that in the Christian worldview. Like, well, they are falling short of perfect, so why would they be at like the Lord's right hand, so to speak, or whatever, up there with Beatrice?
Yes. You see, I have a few things that I'd like to. I hope I don't forget any of those. The first thing is that there are some in Greece, and also the parish that I went to a few months ago has in the narthex, which in the narthex, which is like the place before the actual church room starts. It's like between the door and the actual where the worship is happening.
Okay.
We have images of the Greek sages. They don't have halos because they're not saints in that sense, but they were Christians in a sense. As we have this idea also that God was present in the pagans who were searching for him but had no way of really getting to him, because before Christ, if you weren't part of the Jewish culture, the Jewish people, then you have no direct connection to God in that sense, and you couldn't understand it, or you normally couldn't. And so we believe that he was present with those who were, let's say, acting in love and pursuing truth and all of these things. And also, I hope I don't mix them up now, but I think like one of our saints said that Plato, I hope I don't mix them up, but again, I think he said that Plato was like the first to accept Christ when Christ, after he was crucified, went into Hades, destroyed the doors, and uh, was there to get all of the people in Hades out of Hades. So we think that now they are uh, these thinkers. We think they now are with Christ. It was just that salvation wasn't, even for Abraham, wasn't possible before Christ did what he did. Before Christ died and was resurrected, everyone, except like I think 2 people in the Old Testament, uh, went to Hades. They died and they went into Hades, and they were staying there until Christ came. It's just that, as you just said with Dante's idea, they weren't being tortured, let's say. They were waiting, as I understand it.
Right.
But the thing
Yeah.
about Theos, and I think this is the third thing that I wanted to mention, is that the Orthodox Church, more than any other church, has this core idea that is called theosis, and it's man becoming God. In a sense, not that we become like God the Father, but it's that we remove, by the grace of God and with His help and the help of His saints and His Holy Mother, we remove every stain and everything that is in contradiction to Him as we go on with our lives. And we become people who God can flow through freely with nothing holding Him back. And then we become one with God without losing our individuality, but we become our true selves in the image of God. And our true selves would be where we don't have this sinfulness that is attached to us now, also by our own decisions, obviously. And so if you don't have the necessary tools for that, then you just can't do it. It's impossible. You can almost view it as something technical. So necessary for salvation, for becoming one with God, is, for example, Holy Communion. If you don't receive Holy Communion, then you're lacking something. And if you can't go to confession and your sins can't be forgiven, then you're also lacking something. No matter how hard you try. It's like if your bicycle doesn't have wheels, then no matter how hard you try to drive it, you're gonna fail. And so you can almost view it as something technical. It's not like God's judgment doesn't work in the same way that our judgment does. It's not like I'm angry with you and you deserve this, and that's why I put you there. Even that might be part of it, but that's not the how this works. It's that we condemn ourselves. We take on things that are contrary to God, which means that they are contrary to life itself, which puts us into alignment with death. And so if you are aligned with death, then you can't be at the same time aligned with life. It's impossible because it's a contradiction. And so, yeah, I think that's very, very important to understand.
Yeah, there was a lot there. Yeah, I guess I guess my interpretation of the whole heaven thing, like you said, there was only like a couple figures from the Old Testament that ended up going to heaven. Like there's like one throwaway line in Genesis where Enoch is raised up to be beside God or whatever it says. I'm not quite sure.
Yes, 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 yes.
And the rest of the time death is just described as Sheol, which like 9 out of 10 translations I can find of Sheol is just a pit in the ground or a hole or a burial site or something like that. I'm like, okay, so did they not have a conceptualization of the afterlife among the ancient Israelites, or was it actually there from the beginning but extremely rare, because we do have one little line or two little lines in Genesis that say it, and then that's a lot to think about.
Yeah, definitely. We can you can think about it in the next week when we talk. We can go back to it. Just if you let it sink in, or maybe if later in the conversation something else comes to mind, then just spit it out. Because there's something like one more thing that I'd like to talk about, which is um, the idea of symbolism and incarnation. Uh, because in the beginning of our conversation, you said that you're not sure if it objectively happened, and I and I would try to put a thought into words that I find very hard to verbalize. Um, and instead, incarnations happen all the time. Um, the way that the world works is not merely materialistic. Um, as we talked about, the like existence is not as clear cut as people of the modern world would like to have it. Um, we have the idea of something, and we have the potential, the material. And when these things come together, then something can form. So Jonathan's favorite example is the cup. You have the idea of a cup, something that can hold a fluid, and you have the material that can actualize, that can form into that can be formed into the cup. And only when the idea, which is completely non-materialistic, non-physical, and the potential, the material, come together in the right way, in a coherent way, then this thing can incarnate, and this thing can form, materialize, actualize itself. And so if you try to take paper and make it into a cup, then that's not going to work. Or if you take metal, but you put a bunch of holes in it, then that's also not going to work because it will flow out. So, or if your idea of a cup has these holes in it, and then you know what I mean. If these things don't
Right.
fit together, then it can't incarnate properly. But you have these incarnations all the time. And so we see how bass actualizes, or how my guitar actualizes. It manifests itself because the material is put together in the correct way. And I think all these things exist in a hierarchy. There are better bass, there are better doors, there are better guitars, and there are worse versions of all these things, up until to the point where they don't work at all. And also up until the point where they work perfectly.
Yeah.
And that's the idea of Christ also, is that Christ is where the image of God is perfectly incarnated in the world, in a human being. So it's a lot higher. Christ is a lot higher than a cup or a guitar or whatever. But the process is categorically the same. It's just different in quality, let's say, and also obviously in level that it happens on. Um, but the thing, the process itself, is the same thing. And so it came down to, do I believe that the perfection can incarnate as well, or do I think that only imperfect things can incarnate? And if I believe the latter, then I won't be able to believe in Christ. But if I think that this process is working on every level of reality, which to me just makes sense, to me it seems obvious, then I also have to believe in Christ and in his incarnation.
Yeah, to run with that metaphor for a little bit more, I see a lot of people running around with a nothing but a paper cup, you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like you need a better cup. And, you know, I have an instruction manual on how to build a better cup right here.
Yes, yes, yes. Very much, very much.
Yeah, I kind of want to go back to just Lazarus for a minute, like one of the first like instances you see of a resurrection, like performed by Jesus Christ himself. So, do you think there's like a little bit more symbology there that Lazarus was like the trial run of, you know, rescuing a soul from the underworld? Like if going to heaven was truly that rare in that time, then Lazarus he wasn't that special. He's not even mentioned in the Bible that much, but he dies and then Jesus seems to deliberately allow for that to happen because he delays his trip. I think it's due to the Sabbath. He just delays his trip. And then when he finally gets there, he's already passed on. And then a few little like ritual practices later, he's up and kicking again. So like after what you said, I kind of think like that this is just a little bit of what's about to happen. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, try it around. I don't think that Jesus needed to practice it. He know, I don't think that that was the reason, but I also
Yeah.
don't think that that's what you
Maybe not a
implied.
practice run, but just to like show the people like so they
Yes,
understand like this is what I'm capable of so they're
yeah,
not really messed up afterwards when it happens for everybody.
especially because you probably remember that they said that his like Lazarus' sisters said to Christ when he said, "Open the tomb." They said to him, "But he smells already." And there's this idea in Judaism at that time that when the body starts to smell, that's when you're gone beyond repair. So no one has ever resurrected. No one has ever resurrected someone um, after that
Yeah, he's
state.
physically starting to rot away on the inside and the gases are releasing.
Yes, and
Because
so
there would be many,
that's
I would think there'd be many examples of people being in a coma and they would just be thinking like, oh, they're not alive anymore, but they still have the breath of life. Their heart's still beating, so it's not too late for them, so to speak. But like once everything is gone, then they understand that there's no turning back from that.
yes, and also you have in the resurrection of Lazarus, Christ differentiates himself very, very much from the prophets who did resurrect people. So we have, I think it was in the book of Micah, but I'm not quite sure. But there's a prophet, maybe Elijah, maybe,
Mm.
who resurrects a little boy. Um, and there might be also a few more instances like that. But we have prophets who do resurrect people, but only to a certain state. And after that state, the Jews are sure about no one can resurrect this person anymore, except God, obviously, because he can do what he wants. And so that's where Christ shows himself again as who he truly is, which is God. Like in the theology of the time, and obviously then now Christian theology.
Like that's kind of where I get like hung up on something. Like you just mentioned like what God wants. See, like I kind of think that like if God truly does operate on a completely different level, I would think wantonness and desire would not be a part of it. Does that make any sense? Like if he doesn't have any limitations, like I don't think he would do anything specifically because he just wanted it. I think that probably comes from like the benevolence of God that you see in Christianity as opposed to the God of jealousy that you see in the Old Testament. I think there was a difference in perception there. So what do you think about that?
I would say God, well, obviously isn't driven by desire the same way that we are, and doesn't simply want things. God is perfectly clear to himself in his motives, let's say. So if he wants something, he knows exactly why he wants it. And there's also a perfect logic, I would say. I would use that word now. Logic in the things that he wants. So we are often, I think the word is compartmentalized. Like we have things that contradict with each other in ourselves, and we also are confused by our own desires. We don't know all of our motives. God does. And so if when I say he can do what he wants, that means that he obviously is limitless. So if God wanted to lie, then he could lie, for example. But God's nature is truth and uprightness and law. So there's no instance where he would want to act against that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Like just bringing it back to how like intrinsic and important story is to people. It reminds me of a quote by Neil Gaiman, my favorite writer. Who said a great story is a lie that tells the truth. Because he's talking about Shakespeare, and like I think the specific play was A Midsummer Night's Dream, and he has like all of these characters in, like, it's the comic book Sandman, and he has all these characters performing this play in like the fairy realm. It takes a lot to get into, but like there's a fairy realm, they're all performing this play, and there's one character that just has this throwaway line that's like, it's incredible. I know these events have never come to pass, but they're just so undeniably true. And it's like, that's how I really feel about the Bible. Like, it doesn't matter to me if it happened, because the story itself is the structure, it's the pattern in which we all like live our lives. So like when you have a story that you've never read before tell you something about yourself that just slaps you in the face, it's pretty undeniably true as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, and that's also the way that Christ, oftentimes Christ teaches us in parables. There's no claim that these parables happened, not even in the Bible. The vinestock, the vinestock thing, like the vineyard where the the father sends servant, and they kill him and kill him and kill him. And then he sends his son, and they kill his son as well. Like this particular thing that didn't literally happen in the sense that there was a real vineyard, but it's true. It's true on I mean, first of all, it's true, and then it's true in a symbolical way because it also prefigures what will happen to Christ and what Christ is doing on it. So yeah, you can tell lies of fictional stories or parables, and they can incorporate truth perfectly. And the difference then, I think, for me personally, with the biblical stories, that the way that I understand them is that they are these perfect manifestations of of proofs. And I believe that the perfect examples of these ideas did happen. Like, I think that's how reality works, is that at one point they will manifest. I think that's what happened in the story of Noah, for example. Like, I do believe that happened. I also believe that Adam and Eve literally, objectively existed. I think there was a flood. I think there was an ark. Ark? Arch? Ark.
Yeah.
Ark. Yeah.
Yeah.
And all these things.
Will and I had a barbecue recently, and we just we were talking about like Cain and Abel, and the conversation started with like engineers and laborers have been enemies since the dawn of time, and then Will was just like, "Yep, that was Cain and Abel." I'm like, "You're right." And then that really got me thinking, like, what if that is the unequal offering that they offered to God? Like, one was just like, I have an idea, and the other one was doing all the work, and he's just like, I'm sick of it, you dang engineers. But yeah,
I get what you mean. Yeah, it makes sense.
That's just a tiny example of like Cain and Abel could literally mean like any number of things, but it's undeniably true. Like sibling rivalry or just like any kind of rivalry, like you understand that like it's a brotherly love. There's also a bit of a not a hatred, but like a vengeful feeling that comes along with it.
Yes. Yeah, very much. I see what you mean. So you can see that in every aspect of reality. You see the Christian stories, the Christian patterns, the biblical patterns manifest themselves to higher or lesser degrees. I think that in itself is something really amazing, because as a true materialist, you can't believe in it. You can't open your eyes to it, because the moment that you do, you have to disregard your whole worldview.
Yeah. I don't know if I exactly fit into the materialist mold, because like I practice tarot. Like I'm like I said, I'm a vessel for all kinds of demonic ideas, so I'll try anything once. Like I think like that's one of my major problems with Ayn Rand and objectivism, is that she completely disregards the spiritual, and like to say like you shouldn't join this particular religion because it's destructive, that's one opinion. But to say all religion is destructive and belief in any god is destructive, and you have to follow these objective truths that she inherently gained from her, Christian upbringing, and like rebellion against communism, like a rebellion against communism and rebellion against God. gets you objectivism. So I really feel like there needs to be more philosophy that's like for something good rather than against something evil, because like I forget who said this first, but lots of people who said it, like atheists don't believe in God, yet they all believe in a devil. Like Sam Harris is a perfect example of someone who like preached atheism is the way to go, Christianity is parasitic and vile, but the devil exists and his name is Donald Trump. Like, I think you missed the point, Sam. Like, and I think the same thing comes out of like Satanism wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Christianity, because Satanism is literally just anti the Christian ethic. So I think the main thing that I've been experiencing when like reading the Bible and researching Christianity specifically more is like you have to live for something instead of just against something. And the Bible, even if you don't believe in the deity, you don't believe the Christian story is objectively physically true, there's still a lot you can gain from it. And like Jordan Peterson was like one of the main ones that like flipped that switch with just the simple phrase, I act as if God exists. I'm like, okay, I can reach that point. I can be a good person through that lens. That's something to strive for, but I just don't know if I can, like, that secret ingredient of faith is just dicey for me, and I don't know where people find that.
It's you see, there's always a leap. There's always a leap of faith that you have to make if you
Right.
want to become a Christian. But it's not necessarily as big of a leap as people would like to believe. There are many things that people think they just have to believe that you can test, and that you can compare. I'm not going to get into the details of that now because that's a whole other topic, and I'm also not well read enough to really talk about that in public, I would say, because I'd have to, well, whatever. But you can, for example, you can compare the different religions and the claims of the different religions, and then from that point on, you can make out things that truly are impossible to be true, without trying to cause offense. For example, if you try to study Islam, you are going to encounter things that show you that it's impossible for Islam to be true because it contradicts itself in many different ways, and also in very funny ways where the Quran calls on the Bible and confirms the Bible, thinking in the inherent belief that the Bible confirms the Quran. But when you go to the passages and the ideas that the Quran is pointing towards, then it says the opposite of what the Quran, the author of the Quran thought it said. So you can make comparisons like that, for example, and then you can root out things that you definitely won't be believing in because it makes no sense whatsoever. Then there are historical things that you can look at. You can see how many things point towards someone called Jesus of Nazareth existing and having been crucified as causing, I think, what's it called, like political uproar or something like that. So that's we have documents pointing towards that, for example. Then you can look at the apostles who talked to Christ directly, to this person, Jesus, directly, and who were willing to die horrible, gruesome deaths for their beliefs and the things that they said, with literally nothing to gain whatsoever. They lost everything for their claims. They lost their status, they lost their money, they lost their homes, they lost their health, they lost their families, and they lost their lives in 11 of 12 cases. Like, the only one that lived up till he died of old age was Saint John, who was a kid when he was around with Christ. All other apostles gained nothing and died horrible, gruesome deaths. So there's like, you can think about how plausible is it that someone is willing to die for a lie that they know is a lie, uh, and they gain nothing from and lose everything through. Like, that's also a thing to just ponder on, and a million other things. So the leap gets smaller and smaller the more that you investigate, but it still stays one. I at one point had to say, okay, I think this is enough for me to feel secure enough. Jesus, please, like, help me. I would like to do the personal thing now, like the emotional thing that I can't think logically about, because it's an emotional connection that you have to establish.
Right. Yeah. I also remember one conversation that Paul Vanderklay had on his channel, and I don't remember who he was talking with, but she was a Christian, and then she like made a point that said talking about faith and how like she thinks of it as like a gift, as something like she had that other people don't. And like I started thinking about that. I'm like, all this time I've been thinking of like atheism as this little piece of knowledge, this like little intellect that I had that other people didn't have access to. And then I'm like, it would be useful to think about it the other way around. Like, the thing that is like, atheism can't possibly be a piece of knowledge, because by definition it is a lack of something. So I'm the one that lacks the element, the secret ingredient called faith, that keeps me from Christianity or whatever. But oh, there was something else I was gonna say there. I lost my train of thought there. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. So I have no question of, like, when I read the Old Testament and the New Testament and all of that, I have no question whether or not these people believe what they're writing. I just don't know if they're right about what they believe.
Please explain that.
It's just like, I don't know, people have told me that I'm a little too skeptic for my own good. But like I kind of just like the mystery of it, if that makes any sense. Like, when I hear like or when I read the Gospel of John and he describes the resurrection of Christ and everyone's like interpretation of it and what happens afterwards, I'm like, of course I believe that this man believes what he saw, but I just don't know if he's correct.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the atheistic scholars of the biblical texts also say. Those who are honest, at least. And I'm not appealing to authority. I'm just giving a forgot the word. It's they say that these people saw something. I don't know if it was what they claim it was, but they definitely experienced something that shook them to the core. You can make your own way from that.
Yeah, I don't go as far as to say like, well, it obviously means aliens. Just look at the description of Ezekiel's wheel. If that's not a UFO or a drone, I don't know what is. Those people are out to lunch. I mean, I used to be obsessed with Ancient Aliens when I was younger. And I'm just like, this is real. And then I watched like one documentary called Ancient Aliens Debunked. And I'm like, well, shucks.
Yeah, that sucked when I had to accept that.
But yeah, like after, I think there's a lot of people out there that are like stuck on like everything these people say, like our interpretations of something that we don't understand, but I understand it. I think there's a lot of people out there that like think they have the secret key, and I don't have anything against exploring those possibilities, but I do have something against thinking that like you are the only one with the true knowledge. I know what's going on. Like, of course I know that my opinion of the Bible and most mythological stories are uniquely my own, but I would never like talk to you and be like, well, actually, this is what Jesus was. He was an alien. Like, yeah, that, or like for Marvel to come out and say, actually, Jesus was a mutant in this timeline, in this universe. That's what he was. I'm like, that's just not right. I think that if you're going to, at least this is my approach with like trying to tell a story that deals with like religious or biblical themes, like try to set it up so that like people are asking the question, like, does this universe that you're setting up have a God? And be like, my only answer to you could be, if you believe in God, then you can believe in God in this universe. If you don't, well, maybe your opinion wouldn't change, but there's still a bunch of other wacky supernatural things happening. And like the idea of like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, like there's plenty of like really devout Christian scholars who don't believe those were human beings, just titles of the work, like names that like everyone else was trying to like make their own literature, like writing their own everything, but these were the ones that were like canonized, but the rest of them would have like other random names like Philip and I think Peter, and there was like some other ones, but like these were the ones that were canonized in the New Testament, so they just happened to be entitled Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But I think there's a lot of things you could do in a story with just those four figures and not say, well, this means God exists or this means God doesn't exist. Whereas the route Marvel's taking is just, well, it's blasphemous as any way you look at it, right? And I'm not even religious and it doesn't sit right with me.
Bless your heart for that. People who like it very much. And I think you see where this is going as well. It's trying to replace
It's a paper cup is
religion.
what it is.
Yes.
It's a paper
Yeah.
cup. We have a perfectly good glass cup, and people think their paper cup is better.
But they'll notice. They'll notice. And I'm not even looking forward to that because it's going to be, in one way or the other, this is going to be quite unpleasant. But they will notice that it doesn't work. And then,
Yeah.
hopefully, we'll return to what does work.
In the same way that you and I realized Ancient Aliens, that whole theology doesn't work. Like the whole, like, I don't want to attack people, but this whole woke movement doesn't work either. Like, I used to be of the opinion that, like, there's nothing wrong with secular atheism, but since, like, this whole woke thing kind of grew out of it like a cyst, I'm like, maybe there is a problem with it. I never thought, like like 13, 14, 15-year-old Scottsley would never in his life think that I would ever utter the words, "You need Jesus." But like, I start scrolling Twitter, I'm like, these people have nothing to live for. They're just spinning around in circles. Yeah. Was there anything else that you wanted to really get at before we wrap this one up?
Maybe just a mention. We don't have to get into it now. We can try that next time. But you said in like a sentence, you said that you don't want to miss the mystery of it. And let's not get into it now, but we have mystery preserved in Christianity as a fundamental stone to reality. So we believe in mystery as something that belongs to the way that the mystery itself is a part of being, let's say. And we don't think of mystery as something just that's hidden and it exists behind the veil, but we believe in mystery as like mystery itself. It's like it's not just something that's hidden. It's really the mystery itself is a thing. So that's very interesting. If you ever become Christian, you're not going to lose mystery. It's just that different things are going to be mysterious to you.
Yeah, I was like, we'll just finish off with this one quote then from one of my personal heroes who created the Marvel universe, which I brought up, Jack Kirby. And in his writing process, he talks a lot about the mystery, and he said that, like, if I die and I'm confronted by whoever's there on the other side, I only have one thing to say, and that's the questions have been terrific. So,
well said. That's a good quote. Yeah.
Yeah, I just love that. Like, if nothing else in life, the questions, like the answers, they're fine, but the questions are terrific. So we'll leave you with that, and until next time, may the force be with you.
Christ is risen. God bless you all.
Christians, we do not see the stories of the Bible, the stories of salvation, as just this arbitrary set of facts that we must believe in to be saved. Of all Christians, we know the organic process of salvation, the transformation of man into God through participation in the life of God, is the very manner by which the world exists. It's the very thing that links this outward phenomena to consciousness, to nous, to logos, and unites all things towards the infinite. I mean, how awesome is that? And in the background, we've also kept and we hold not only the keys to Christianity. Of all the Christians, we do not see the stories of the Bible, the stories of salvation, as just this arbitrary set of facts that we must believe in to be saved. Of all Christians, we know the organic process of salvation, the transformation of man into God. We also hold the heritage of the ancients. I mean, we're not Platonists, but we have carried Plato. We are not Aristotelian, but we have carried Aristotle, Alexander, Homer, Virgil. And we could add to that, all the useful stories of all people who entered communion with Christ. We keep them alive in the narthex of the church so that they can participate in the manner to which it is possible that they participate in the divine life. You'll recognize these are images of the Greek sages from a narthex in a monastery in Greece. They don't have halos. It's okay. We hold the golden thread that reaches back into the mists of time. The same golden thread that is under increasing threat of being cut. Of all the Christians, we do not see the stories of the Bible, the stories of salvation, as just this arbitrary set of facts that we must believe in to be saved. Of all Christians, we know the organic process of salvation, the transformation of man into God through participation in the life of God, is the very manner by which the world exists. It's the very thing that links this outward phenomena to consciousness, to nous, to logos, and unites all things towards the infinite. I mean, how awesome is that?